Now I think we're recording. Hi, McKenzie. So happy to have you. So I do have a list of student questions that we'll get to, but I'd like to start with kind of like an overview about your background, your path, your current position.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm super happy to be here. I always kind of struggle with this, and I always default to, I grew up in Wisconsin, and that's sort of my intro. So I grew up in Wisconsin. I moved out to San Diego for undergrad at San Diego State and majored in psychology and minored in women's studies. And I was trying to figure out what to include in my professional profile of like all the different volunteer things, because I kind of jumped around, but there were some core things that I would say really filled out my time at SDSU. One was definitely peer advising.
Yes.
That was like really important to my growth personally, professionally, and I think it's actually lent me a lot of skills moving into the counseling world that I didn't necessarily expect. So that was definitely really important. And then I also was kind of involved in different organizations under the umbrella of eating disorders work more generally. So I knew from pretty early on, like AP Psych in high school level, that I was interested in counseling. And coming from my own experience in treatment for anorexia when I was 12 and 13, that sort of was the spark of my interest in the eating disorders field in particular. So those things kind of came together. Women's studies was a big part of like adjusting my lens to the way that culture affects the way we, live with our bodies in the world. And then I just determined that I wanted to move forward with counseling and look for programs that had a social justice focus, but also an eating disorders program. And Lewis and Clark had both of those things. So that's how I landed up here in the Pacific Northwest.
Crazy. Do you like it?
Oh, I love it. It's awesome. Tons of trails, lots of beer and wine. No complaints. Yeah.
Most important things, of course.
Yes.
Okay, so awesome. That's so cool. And you kind of touched on this, like, as far as your background with women's studies and kind of needing an understanding or baseline of other cultures, other identities, etc. So why would you say it's so, or not necessarily so important, but important for psych students to have an understanding of multiculturalism, especially if they want to work with mental health?
Yeah, absolutely. I feel like it should be a requirement of all of us. And I think that is the case in certain places. Kids actually, I think, know much more than we give them credit for, and they're being exposed to more diversity, learning and experience in their life, which is great. That is not something that was a part of my growing up experience. Right. So moving into women's studies, we had a really big focus on intersectional feminism, which helped us kind of examine at SCSU was sort of like the academic side of it, but then also the individual side of it. So what are all of my intersecting identities? In what ways do I hold a lot of privilege? In what ways may I have dealt with oppression in my life? And that moving into counseling in particular is so important because you are in the space with another person who holds, or people who hold a whole multitude of their own identities. And it's easy for us to, I think, kind of forget that we can be representation of oppressive systems and oppressive people when we inhabit that space, including the fact that we're kind of holding a position of power as a therapist. As much as we try to kind of break down that hierarchy, it's still very much present in the room. And it's really important to see like where our own biases and unconscious, teachings that we've had in our lives come forward in the way that we're perceiving the person or people that are in front of us. So I can't say enough about the importance of doing your own work around identity and expanding your base of knowledge about culture, people, diverse populations outside of your own experience.
Absolutely. I completely agree. It's so important because they always talk about like the implicit and explicit biases. And so many times we don't actually know we hold these or don't want to know. So if you can't understand what bias you hold, you're going to kind of put that on other people, especially if you're trying to help someone that is within those biases, for sure. Thank you. So I'll probably end with advice questions and kind of go from like your path, education, career, and then to advice. Okay. So, I kind of like this question. If you were to look back 5 years ago, did you ever envision yourself doing what you're doing now? Did you have other career plans? What did that kind of look like?
Yeah. I'm like, what was my life 5 years ago? I think that I do feel really privileged to have known early on what I was interested in. I think that a lot of people, it's super normal to go into community college, university with kind of like an exploratory mindset, and that has its drawbacks and obviously its benefits too. I think I was just one of those people who knew like, this is what I want to do. I want to be in a room with someone and communicate and be vulnerable and do all the whimsical things. And and so it's sort of like, I always say, like, I feel like I've accidentally networked at times, or I've like accidentally gotten where I am. Obviously that's not true. Like, part of those things were really intentional steps along the way. But I would say for the most part, I did think that I would move into a helping profession. And I did want to be in some way involved in the eating disorders treatment world. So those things were on my mind. Now, the way that the job looks is potentially a little bit different than what I may have initially thought, just at the level of care that I'm working with clients. That day-to-day doesn't necessarily look like what I had pictured initially. So in that way, I would say it's a little bit divergent.
Yeah. Could you elaborate on that? So
Definitely. So initially going into graduate school, I was sort of like, yeah, I'll maybe like start a private practice someday, which still down the road would love to be in a private or group practice. Or maybe I'll work in an agency. And part of our training through our program, we serve 2 semesters in a community counseling center that's affiliated with Lewis and Clark. And so we can see individuals, families, couples there. So I did that work, saw couples and individuals. And that's just a once a week, 1 hour a week, interaction with clients. Where I am now at the Eating Disorders Center of Portland is a higher level of care, and it's eating disorder specific, although we treat many comorbid disorders, and people are struggling with a lot more than just their eating disorders. So my day there, it varies, which is cool because, Cassie can attest to this too. I think both of us like a little bit of movement and a little bit of like unstructured in the day, even though we probably need a little bit more structure than we might give ourselves. Yeah. So it does vary day to day, the work that I do. So in our partial hospitalization program, we have adult clients and adolescent clients. The adolescents are 5 days a week and adults are 7 days a week. And then we also have an intensive outpatient program. And so that looks a little bit different for each client, but essentially it turns into like 3 days a week for adolescents and 5 for adults. And it's a day treatment. So they're there from, right now it's different because we're doing work remotely, but typically they're from like 8 a.m. to 6:30 p.m. And we're kind of like doing the day with them. So I run groups, and then I also have individual clients, but our caseloads are smaller than than some might be at agency. No, it's okay. Also, I have a puppy who may like start barking, so I apologize. That could happen. She might just like run up and jump on the couch. So basically I'm doing work with groups, with families, couples, if that fits for a given client. And then I am doing individual sessions each week too. Caseloads look a little different at this level of care because it's a lot of case management. So that's the stuff that I didn't necessarily expect, and truthfully the stuff that I don't love as much. Paperwork, lots of paperwork. We just switched to electronic medical records, which is thank God. But it's also like contacting insurance and outpatient providers, and that part I like, the talking with outpatient providers to get a holistic picture of a client. But so that day to day looks different. We also eat meals with clients and eat snacks with clients, and that's obviously pretty specific to the eating disorders field in general. But yeah, so I would say it does look different, but I really love the way it looks different. And the groups allow me to kind of engage in a little creativity with like topics and how we want to approach things. And so really enjoying that.
I'm sorry. My daughter lost her mind. She's doing zooms and acrobatics, and that was cute. Stop it. Okay. I'm sorry, everybody. She's distracting sometimes and it's hilarious. Okay. That's super awesome though. Let's see, I had a follow-up. Oh, so what exactly is the title you hold currently and the process of licensure there?
Right. Yeah. So it does vary for licensed professional counselors. It varies state by state. And so right now, as I haven't actually like graduated from my program, that degree will post, I think, in like May-ish. So right now I am a like clinical master's student intern, basically, okay. But take on like the role of therapist, primary therapist, group therapist, and I'm just supervised by a licensed professional. So you're basically doing the work. It's just that you have a higher level of supervision. Your notes have to be co-signed. You're kind of like, your cases are overseen by your supervisor as well. And so then once my degree posts, I'll hold the title of a primary therapist. And our registration, this is not like a fun conversation. It can be really different state by state. I know you're in California, so I'll make it quick. But so basically there's a whole bunch of documents, including transcripts and fees and fingerprinting that you have to send to the state to be registered as an intern. And Oregon requires 2,400 direct client hours. So typically, depending on what type of setting you work in, most people hope to get licensed in like 2 to 3 years. I have a lot of direct client contacts, so I'm hoping to complete it within that range. And then you have to take a licensure exam as well. And then you're like a licensed professional counselor for real.
So it's like the LPC?
Yep, it's an LPC. Yep. And I think might be called something different in California. I'm not sure, but
we have like so many different variations, like LPCC, LPC, LCPC. Like I'm like, what are these? Sorry. Yep. It's wild. That's so cool though. So was there anything like in your undergrad education that you feel like really helped you prepare for graduate school and made you a kind of competitive candidate?
That's a good question. Yeah, I'm trying to like think back on my advising days of, we always said like grades, GRE. My school didn't require the GRE, so
you're getting at most places, which is amazing, but like annoying for me.
You want us all to have to go through the same struggles. So then the relevant experience and letters of recommendation, I think those last two were really big. I did well academically in school. I do think a big part of that, has to do with privilege and not having to work a full-time job while I was in school, and certainly having access to a lot of support. And in not having to work a full-time job, being able to really commit myself to extracurricular things, to that relevant experience work. So I really think that, it is sort of, I don't always like having those conversations about resumes, like it's the way you sell yourself. It always sounds like kind of weird, but it is. I mean, if you can write the certain skill sets that you've used in your different volunteer experiences to kind of like fit the vocabulary of whatever, job you're looking for, graduate program you're looking into. So I think that was the difference, is the relevant experience. I really do think that the women's studies program at San Diego State is top notch. And that work, I think, just going into a graduate interview and being able to speak to my identity, my intersectional identity, and also be able to sit with my privilege and not sit in like shame
Yeah.
of that privilege, or, which doesn't really get us anywhere. Just to be able to like have a pretty grounded understanding of what role that plays. And specifically, Lewis and Clark is a social justice oriented program. So they're looking for candidates who have that in their background and are interested in practicing from that lens. So that was really, really important. And I do think like peer advising was great because it was that person to person contact. Even if we were talking about grades and classes and schedule, you're still getting to know people at a much deeper level, because it's usually not about the grades, the transcripts, those types of things.
Yeah, I definitely liked it because it also helps you learn with like both active and empathetic listening, right? Like not every student that comes in is going to have the same grade or background or values that you do, and you really have to kind of like be listening so you can ask back or reiterate what they're talking about, which I imagine is really important when you're working with clients in a therapeutic setting as well. So yeah, different contexts, but kind of similar skill sets for sure.
Definitely. Yep. Reflection and open-ended questioning and empathy, all very important in the counseling world.
For sure. Do you feel like you had any like mentors that kind of guided you or helped guide you, or specific networking opportunities?
Yeah, like I said, I feel like I've always kind of like done some accidental networking. I'm pretty extroverted, and so I'll kind of just like chat with anyone. I mean, I definitely have to say Dr. Turner, in the advising office was a big support for me through my time there. And Dr. Price also, I worked in his lab for a while, and just such a kind man.
Sweetest.
Yeah, and he was really wonderful to be able to like talk to about what would an MSW look like versus like pursuing mental health counseling, and just was really nice, especially having my parents really far away. And my parents didn't go to graduate school, my mom didn't go to college, and so I think being able to have that almost like paternal presence in him was really nice, really supportive.
He's a Green Bay fan too, right?
I think
Or
so.
no, yeah, Green Bay or Broncos?
No, Bears. I think his wife is from Chicago. Yeah. Yeah.
Because I remember you guys
Conducted there, but but I would say those two. And then there were a few professors in the women's studies department too. Dr. Califf was one of them, who I think when I was there taught the women in sports class, which was one of my favorite classes in all of grad school. And she was definitely a big impact on me as well. So I really lucked out, I feel like, with professors throughout my time there. I had a lot of them that I connected with.
Which is so nice.
Yeah.
So I don't remember if you included in your bio, but so you did do some research in Dr. Price's lab, which was awesome. Do you think, so I know that like you weren't big into research, but do you think it's helped you, the kind of research you did there, like with your current position and graduate school?
Yeah, I think so. I think one, it helped me figure out maybe what I don't necessarily want to spend my day-to-day doing. So that I think that there's always some purpose and meaning that we can extract from our experiences, because they can guide us away from that or towards it. So yeah, because for a while I was also considering trying to get into a PhD program, and then I realized that's not exactly what I want my day-to-day to look like. So yeah, and I also think that being on the other side of research, the other side of like reading the research itself and implementing it into practice, is helpful to know how it's done, to understand the research process a little bit, because it also allows you to be critical of the research too. You can take a look at like what populations they're looking at, what their sample size was, and if you have kind of a basic like baseline understanding of that, it allows you to figure out how the research is going to best apply or not to the clients you're serving. So absolutely, I think that as much as it wasn't for me, it was really valuable experience.
Yeah, the whole advising saying like being a good consumer versus a producer. You have to be a good consumer because you need to be up to date with the most efficient types of therapies or what's working out there. What are people investigating? That kind of stuff, right?
Absolutely. Yeah.
That's so cool. And then to kind of go with like, so not just like your school involvement, et cetera, but so how did you begin working with NADA, and has your position within the organization kind of grown over time, or have you stayed kind of the same area?
Yeah, definitely. So the National Eating Disorders Association, they have many different like kind of arms to the organization. The thing I was most involved in was the walks, and San Diego, it was the San Diego walks, and then when I moved up here, it was the Portland walk. So it varied. I was a student liaison, which basically meant I was reaching out to other student groups, sororities, psych classes, to kind of get people to the walk. And in that, raising funds, raising awareness also about eating disorders. A big bulk of their money goes to eating disorders research, which is really, really important. But the activism is certainly crucial too, because there's definitely some misunderstanding of how eating disorders manifest and who they affect. So that was a student liaison role. And then I sort of went to an organizer role. And that basically allowed me to kind of stretch out further into the community off of just our campus and onto others like Point Loma and UCSD. So yeah, that kind of just was like an extension of the first role. And then up here, I got to do a lot more of the planning of the walk and just coming up with ideas for like a scale smash and, also helping with the fundraising as well. So yeah, it's sort of, I've stayed in the same realm. I would love to be more involved with the organization. But that kind of local level is where I've remained over the past few years.
Which is really cool. Was it hard to balance kind of all that, like the grad school, being involved in different organizations, and maintaining a personal life?
Yeah. It varied at times. I think I was someone in undergrad who kind of said, put everything on my plate. I'll try it all. I admittedly having a very difficult time, especially I think as a teaching assistant, delegating work. So that's something that I've really had to learn over the years, is just boundaries around my energy and time. And knowing that like I can trust my peers and my colleagues to help me out with this and lean on them for that support. That's been a really big growth point for me, continues to be. So I would say that it really has kind of been like up and down. When I was working on the ASDA conference here in Portland a few summers ago, that definitely took a good amount of time and energy. But the unique part about graduate school in my experience in our program is our class time is not as much as maybe some programs are or what I expected it to be. So our classroom time was kind of in like 3-hour chunks a few times a week. And so I was able to balance it, and I certainly am like no stranger to like having a good time. So I think I've been able to maintain all three of those things, and working a little bit too along the way.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Let's see, where was I going? So how do you find that your minor of wooden studies has come in handy in your current position in graduate school, etc.?
Yeah, so in addition to, I guess, the reflection on intersectional identity, privilege, oppression, those things are crucial to like the baseline of learning. I think that overall it exposed me to a feminist lens. I think that like I carry into the counseling work. So for me, how that looks now, and I noticed on the list of questions, someone asked, what is feminist therapy, which is a great question. And I won't like answer it in its entirety, but generally, the view of your client as not being the problem. Like the problem is not inherent to them, but rather sort of exists more culturally and globally. So that means taking a look at like stories that my clients tell themselves and where did those actually source from? You know, things like don't take up space or don't use your voice, you're too big, you're too much. Oftentimes we can draw a direct line usually to family and then also to like culture at large. So the feminist work certainly seeps into, I think sometimes just like unconsciously into my work with clients on a day-to-day basis.
Absolutely. And I'm going to get into kind of like a follow-up question to that soon. Not quite yet. So overall, what did the like structure of your graduate program kind of consist of?
It really shifted over the 3 years. So the program that I'm in, there's a 7-semester, 8-semester, and then an addictions track. And I'm in the 8-semester track. So this is my last semester coming up right now. Yeah, so close.
Yeah.
And so initially, you do go to school year round in our program, and initially it is course load heavy. So we had I would say 3 to 4 classes, and we had electives. I had my eating disorders electives kind of sprinkled in throughout the years. So a lot of coursework at the beginning, and then gradually less coursework and more sort of human connection work. Our classes were really, really discussion oriented and very like doing the things, even if that meant like role playing or, you know, doing sort of like mock counseling sessions, which for me was great in terms of holding my attention and engagement. So we kind of transitioned from classes to practical skills, which is where we did counseling with one of our peers.
Mm-hmm.
And at that point, I think I was also taking a group counseling class where I got to go to a local middle school and do kind of psychoeducation groups and communication groups with junior hires. So that was cool. And also was doing work in the clinic. So once we got to the part of being at the Lewis and Clark Clinic and starting like our caseload with clients, our class, the number of our classes started to drop off. And then once you're in kind of where I'm at now, with just being an internship, most people have maybe an elective and then a group supervision class once every other week. So yeah, and all of the way through, it was like draining in different ways and fulfilling in different ways. But I think there's the one thing that I can say, I was talking to actually a Lewis and Clark Q&A new admission group the other day. The rigor of graduate school, at least in this realm of counseling, has been so much less academic and so much more emotional and like interpersonal than I expected. And especially coming from like a large research institution where I was like crushing Scantrons every couple weeks, like that is not, this is like write a 25-page paper about how your family affected your life. And it's like, oh, okay. That one hits you in the soul. Yeah. So it's much different in that way. It has its own like special flavor to it. And like the difficulty is not that of undergrad, certainly not that of like going to law school or an MBA program. It's its own sort of experience. Yeah.
It's awesome. Yeah, I definitely liked like my program where it was like our classes were small and a lot of the like there weren't a lot of tests except for stats. Did you have to take stats?
We did. We took like a statistical or like research methods class. So yeah.
But then everything else was kind of like read the article and come with discussion questions, you know, like we're going to talk in a group about how we believe these things apply in these settings or what have you, which is really nice compared to like, here's a 50-question exam and no interaction with your professor.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, definitely cool. And it helps you build a cohort too when you're in those smaller classes because everyone's kind of in the same position, which is nice.
Absolutely. I loved my cohort. That was a huge support throughout this process.
It's so important too to like have at least one other person in the same kind of position as you are.
Yeah.
For sure. And then so kind of moving beyond a little bit, what did the process consist of during and kind of like close to after masters in order to work as like the primary therapist for EDCP? So you said you're like on the way for that, right?
Right. So yeah, essentially they've hired me on, and my title will shift once my degree is posted and I'm a registered intern.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So part of our program is like a built-in internship. So we kind of have to seek that out year 2 and try to solidify something. And there are a bunch of different sites and a bunch of different topic areas or population groups in Portland and outside of Portland. Some people do their practice up in Washington State because we're really close. So essentially, I just kind of had been in contact with EDCP through like continuing education, like community gathering types of events. Told them that I was interested, did an interview, in which I think the first thing that the director at the time said was, "You have fantastic brows." And I was like, this is a place that I'd like to work.
Yeah.
So yeah, we have a very like casual and personal work environment, which I love. Yeah, so aside from that, it's really like site specific on how you proceed. Usually there's background checks and all that kind of thing. And then you kind of just get into the work and start training, and kind of goes from there. I mean, my responsibilities increased over like the first few months. Initially, it was like a lot of shadowing groups, shadowing individual sessions, and then it became more of like doing my own work independently. Yeah, and so the rest of it will kind of change based on all of the not so fun, like, state registration thing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Right. So was that kind of transition from classroom to clinical work kind of hard or shocking, or did you feel really prepared for it?
Yeah, again, I was just talking to some new admit students about this. I think our program in particular at Lewis and Clark does a great job of creating a really smooth transition into the clinical work. You get sort of the theoretical base, and then you start to kind of play around with what clinical work will look like in like safe little peer environments. And then I was really excited starting at the clinic. I remember going in the first day. This is like, we did a warm handoff, which is basically when the clinicians who are leaving kind of like introduce you to your new client who may be staying at the clinic. So I had an idea of who a few of my clients were going to be. And I was stoked. I was like ready to jump in. Now, I don't think that's everyone's experience. I think that, like, I know for my partner, there was definitely some anxiety, which is really common. And truthfully, I certainly had anxiety about what it was going to look like. Also, we're on film. Like, that can feel weird until you just forget about it.
Yeah.
So I was mostly excited. I think everybody had a much different experience going in. And one thing we talked about in the Lewis and Clark Q&A the other day was good old imposter syndrome, which can just follow you around at any stage you're at. And I think that, I was talking to my partner, and I think it is really important to mention that it's okay for that to persist into your work at times. Like, there are days where I'm like, yes, queen, you're crushing it. We're doing really well. And the next day I'm like, I don't know what the hell I'm doing. So that does not go away. I think it's just like being able to sit with it and recognize it, and to know that like you are supposed to be there and you're doing the work that you need to do, and reach out for support as much as you can, as much as you have access to.
Yeah.
So
absolutely.
it was definitely a transition, but yeah, I would say it can be up and down. I love it. I think a lot of my peers found that they really loved it and felt fulfilled by the work. So you get used to it.
Absolutely. And then kind of like along those same lines, like what has been kind of the most fulfilling aspects of the work, and what's been kind of the most difficult part of it?
I tell my clients this all the time in groups and in individual sessions, that my personal view of therapy and the therapeutic work is that I am walking alongside you. I'm not dragging you through realizations or insights or growth, nor am I sort of like standing back as you like wander aimlessly through your experience. And so in that process, I'm learning so much with clients, so many beautiful insights that they bring to groups and they bring to individual sessions that have taught me a lot. And I mean, it sounds like a little bit like woo woo, but I do feel so humbled by the work and so like appreciative of being able to see people in their growth and also in a lot of their struggle. I mean, that is such a like a privileged thing that we get to sit with people in sometimes the most vulnerable places that they've ever been, and the most open like expression that they will provide in the world, because hopefully we're creating a safe enough space for them to do that. And yeah, it's just you have access to people and their experience and their kind of holistic being in ways that I don't think we necessarily do in day-to-day life. So that is, you know, that's really like big and broad, but that's a huge gift and what I've loved about the work. Struggles, I would say, again, probably like energetic and emotional boundaries. Yeah. I think that is definitely something that, you know, it's like, how do you not like take the work home? Or, you know, that expression. So yeah, I mean, everyone uses different things. For me, it's awesome at the end of the day to know that like I can take Juniper to the dog park with my partner and watch her like leap around in her uncoordinated way and just like decompress.
Yes.
You know, so like that's awesome. Being outdoors is like such a gift here. Mm-hmm. So that kind of stuff really, really helps. I think for other people, using art as a way to decompress and even to process through some of their clients and what their clients are going through, that's really important. And therapists have therapists. Like, let that be known. It is super important. Like, there are times that clients have certainly brought up, with my own eating disorder history, that stuff can get trudged up sometimes. And I think it's super easy to kind of like lock it down and say, no, I'm a therapist now, so like I'm not supposed to struggle. That makes it so much worse. So being open about the way that clients impact you, whether it's trauma stuff, eating disorder stuff, just generally feeling like emotionally too full. Yeah. That can be a struggle, but I think again, it's kind of a constant learning process of how to deal with it.
Yeah, that definitely makes sense. Excuse me. So a lot of kind of the rest of the questions are like, people are extremely interested in like how eating disorders develop. I'll start with this kind of question. So like, how common are eating disorders? Do you think they are more of a rich country problem? And do you see a lot of diversity in your clients?
Yeah. Well, according to NEDA, they usually say that it's somewhere around 10 million women and 5 million men that struggle with eating disorders. Now, they themselves, as an organization, are growing to be more inclusive of trans and non-binary folks as well. And there's a big gap in the research around eating disorders with trans non-binary folks. But what we know is it is affecting those communities at really, really high rates, sometimes for different reasons. I think for a long time, it's been sort of the belief via the research that it's this drive for the thin ideal. And it's like a thin white woman's, you know, middle to high socioeconomic status problem. What we actually know is that is not the case. Our clients here actually in Oregon are fairly diverse, both in like racially, not so much because Portland is very white, but we do have some racial diversity, definitely size diversity. If I could say anything to people about eating disorders, it is that it does not look like one body. Yeah. So there are a lot of people that are struggling with eating disorders and goes unnoticed because of our own fat phobia, our own like just the medical care system is not good at detecting eating disorders, specifically in people who are living in larger fat bodies. But they are struggling too. So we definitely have a lot of size diversity. And that's a big part of where like the insurance, working with insurance and doing like that advocating is really important. You know, just because my client's at a certain BMI does not mean that they're not struggling. Right. And yeah, we have had certainly some male clients, lots of trans, non-binary clients. The bulk of our clients are female identifying cis women, but it hits everyone. And I think that that's not to say also that, like, you know, racism and capitalism and, you know, transphobia, all of these things are sending messages into the world, and people are receiving them in their own like social location, and it's impacting them differently. I was just listening to a podcast the other day, Virgie Tovar's podcast. I think it's called Rebel Eaters. I love podcasts too. There's so many good ones out there. And she was talking to someone, I want to say, I don't remember their name now, but they were kind of talking about like, what is it like to be a fat Black woman in a society that, you know, glamorizes and idealizes a thin white woman's body? That has an impact. Now, different communities of people, I think, you know, historically have had different feelings about therapy in the first place. And have certainly been impacted by lack of access. So I think now we're starting to see more and more, like, you know, diverse folks seek therapy. And that makes it so important for us also to be diverse as clinicians. And also, like, not to say that like a white clinician can't serve a Black client, but you really got to be aware of like what your privilege and their experience of racial oppression, how that impacts your relationship with them and the work that you do together. So I'm always a big advocate of like, yeah, this like young Black woman deserves to find like a Black queer therapist who looks like her, who maybe has had some of her experience. Like, I don't need to be that person for everyone. That's really important. So I may have gone like totally tangential there, but I don't know.
I agree. I do. I think it's like pretty important to have a therapist that you feel you can connect with, or that can connect to you. And it does, I mean, yeah, there are going to be people who are like, I could have any gender, any race therapist and I can be fine. But there are some people who may not even know that that's not going to work for them. Like like in my work with like kind of sexual assault victims, etc., like a lot of women would have male therapists that they wouldn't tell things to because they're male. It's like, well, unfortunately, like, you're not going to get out of this what you need because of your current relationship with the opposite sex. Like, you need to kind of maybe reevaluate that, which is hard to kind of come to, but important as well.
Yeah, my partner actually did his work at the Domestic Violence Resource Center, and he did a lot of investigating of his own male privilege and power in the room. And I think that you're right in that sometimes that is not the right call for clients. That is not at all what they need. They can't find a sense of safety when someone represents the harm that they've gone through. I think in other cases, he did find too that you can sort of be like a healing person in that identity as well, like someone who can be representative of safety when white men, cis white men have not been. So I think there's that potential, but I think that you're spot on in that clients always reserve the right to find someone that they feel safe and comfortable with.
Absolutely. Another thing I wanted to ask you, and I wasn't sure if maybe you guys have talked about this in any form, but so one of the things I talk with my Psych 101 students, so when we talk about the ratio of disorders from male to female, so women tend to get the internalizing disorders, depression, etc. Men tend to get externalizing disorders. And part of that is the way we exhibit the behaviors, right? A woman may be really sad, dark, whatever, not talking about it so much. But a man can have depression that looks like ADHD, right? And we're going to be more likely to give them ADHD meds because they have these externalizing behaviors. But really that could be the gender-specific kind of symptoms presented, right? Like, so as a man, society says I'm not supposed to show these internalizing things. So instead, I'm going to be kind of aggressive or out there or like same with eating disorders. Like maybe I just work out way too much every day. My whole life is this, but this isn't me being antisocial or me being a bully or me being like just a testosterone male. It's actually me trying to cope with my body or something like that. Is that things that kind of come up?
Absolutely. Absolutely. I mean, that's the impact of culture on all of us. And yeah, I think that you're right. And they're not going to get read the same way. Like the guy who's working out every single day feels actually really out of control in those behaviors, feels totally consumed by what he's consuming, and by his body. It's going to read on Instagram as like, oh yeah, like this guy's yoked and this guy's just super committed.
Athletic and
yeah, and I think that like it is in many cases harder for men to come forward with their struggle, especially, and this is the case with eating disorders too, is when those like bodies that are actually very unwell are prized. And there's such like an ascription of power given to those bodies. It's so much harder to get untangled from the eating disorder. But yeah, definitely. I think that like our own cultural lenses and what we believe is possible for a given person based on their gender identity to be dealing with, it locks us in to only a set of possibilities, and it keeps people really like trapped in their experience.
It's really unfortunate, and it's hard because it's like, how do you reach out with someone who doesn't want to be reached out to, or is being applauded by their friends for being in really good shape and healthy, but it's actually like a result of whatever could be happening, which I imagine is hard. So again, so sorry, going back, I kind of went on a tangent there. What are the most common ways that eating disorders tend to develop? Like, is it trauma? Is it genetics? Is it mostly our cultural and societal values or views? What have you kind of seen or experienced?
It's yes. It's all across the board. I think with anorexia nervosa in particular, there has been research that's indicated a link genetically. And certainly in my experience, I could see how my mom's experience with an eating disorder genetically may have impacted me, but I think also like familial culture was very much, I guess I can speak from my experience and through this too, like we had a familial culture of exercise and prizing a certain body as fitness means dedication. It means like that's in alignment with our value set. Health looks one way. And again, like I've had to do a lot of my own healing in that and realizing that parents are doing the best that they can often. They have also struggled, and it's sort of like this like handing down of pain, whether that be, you know, intergenerational trauma, or the handing down of eating disorder behaviors and those types of patterns, whatever it might look like. So, I mean, I think that like it's that nature nurture, right? And I think nature is part of it. It's there. And the nurture component, what we see in so many of our clients is that unknowingly parents, family systems are so deeply involved in diet culture, and they're so deeply embedded in their own really limited views of health that it probably has negatively contributed to their child's development or their, you know, child's development of an eating disorder. And it also keeps them locked in that too. And so that's part of the work, is family work around unlearning and changing your like orientation towards food and body and movement. So that's definitely part of it. And I think, I guess I see that as sort of like a whole big trickle down from culture as well. I mean, when's the last time that you went to a grocery store and like didn't see a magazine by the checkout that told you about this new diet or this new exercise that was going to give you this ideal body? And usually beyond the ideal body, it's these relationships, this job, this level of success, this level of belonging, this level of worthiness. And that's like that juicy stuff that we get to with clients, that it's like about the food, it's about the body, but it's also not. It's about so much more than that too. So yeah, I think it is just a yes to all of those things. And diet culture has done a number on a lot of us in our lives. And it's really, really harmful. So it's about unlearning that. It's about giving ourselves more flexibility with food and with what's beautiful and what's lovable and worthy.
Exactly. I totally agree. And I think it's interesting too, like now with this COVID-19 pandemic, there's like a lot of things being posted about losing weight, keeping up with your exercise, like all this stuff, especially like in California where hikes are closed, beaches are closed, any sort of gym type situations closed. So everyone's posting, like I see it everywhere on Instagram right now. And has anything come up like that recently for like while you're transitioning to online kind of therapeutic practice?
My dog's just like walking around. Yes. Oh my gosh, yes. If I see another home workout, damn it. Like, yes. Yeah, I mean, it's everywhere. And it's so, and I think the remarkable thing to me is that we're in a pandemic, people, and like we're really preoccupied with like gaining 10 pounds. That, I mean, that puts into perspective like how much value we place on bodies and on appearance over just like do what you want to do. You know what's also great to do right now? Bake a fucking cake. Like, and eat the whole thing. Like, just do what you want to do. And yeah, and our clients are struggling with that too because our programming has gone virtual. And that means that, you know, they are, oh, there's my partner.
Hi.
I'm gonna take the dog out. That's Sam.
Hi, Sam.
Sorry, was I supposed to stay anonymous?
It's okay. So yeah, I mean, I think so basically like they are existing with a lot less containment right now. And that they're at home and they have access to like all of these different home workouts and, you know, diet plans and a lot less support, like in-person support. So yeah, we're definitely seeing the impact of that. And, you know, it's tough. It's really hard to kind of like untangle like the health and fitness industry. But I always tell clients too, like as much as social media can be a negative force, it can be a positive force. You just have to seek out the accounts that like don't make you feel like shit.
Yeah.
And accounts that like, you know, display diverse bodies. I think that that's part of like, if there's one good step that people can take, it's like, well, who are you following? Like, are you following accounts that like represent fat bodies and not just like in parts of them?
Yeah.
But like, and display them as beautiful and sexual and strong, like change the feed in that way to like shift your lens. Because one person that I also would say is a really big kind of role model of mine is Hillary Knavy. And she is one of the co-founders of Be Nourished up here in Portland, Oregon. And they do a lot of wonderful work with bodies. And she said in our fat studies class, like, if you can change that lens, the world gets so much more beautiful. And I think that that is so true. It's pretty remarkable.
Yeah, I love that kind of stuff. It's so cool. And so kind of so this is going to be like a set of a few questions. What is your favorite therapeutic modality and which seems most successful? And then like how do you really reverse something as serious like body dysmorphia or anything that comes along with that? What does the timeline look like? That kind of stuff.
Yeah, in terms of modality, it's tough. I mean, no one really wants to say that they're like eclectic in their style and use like a bunch of different things. However, I think if you are like married to one, then you're really probably not doing yourself and your clients justice. So I'll kind of list the ones that I use most often. I think feminist therapy is in there because it's just sort of the lens through which I'm seeing clients and seeing what they're struggling with. I think also a lot of somatic work, which I never thought I would necessarily be drawn to. Like, I'm like, that's like some whimsical bullshit, but I'm here in the work like, wow, this is really impactful. upcoming year, the training got canceled, but hopefully we'll get rescheduled. I'm hoping to do a sensory motor psychotherapy training, which is specifically utilized for trauma and PTSD, but generally locating like where our pain, suffering, emotion, energy gets stuck in our bodies and sort of processing through using the body. And I think that can both be difficult with a lot of folks struggling with eating disorders, because a lot of times they just want to get out of their bodies. It leads to a lot of dissociation, a lot of detachment from the body. And it brings them home to their body, and that can be really very much a struggle. And add on, any sort of trauma someone's experienced where, you're at a place where your body doesn't feel safe. It can be really hard, but it's a way of sort of rejoining like body, mind, soul. So I love that work. A lot of treatment facilities for a long time have used things like DBT and CBT and RODBT, which I definitely use principles of, but I would not say by any means that I'm a worksheet therapist, and not that CBT and DBT therapists are by any means. It looks a lot of different ways. But I would say that I am more drawn to like the emotional focused, sensory focused work. And also use like a lot of narrative practices. So like the stories we tell ourselves, and then sort of like rewriting our stories. And I love ecotherapy. Lewis and Clark has an ecotherapy program too. And so basically it's just like using the outdoors as a support, as a connecting piece and a healing piece for clients. So I use a lot of eco metaphor, and we are really lucky to be down here on the waterfront where we're really close to the river. So a lot of like walk and talks that happen, and, using the outdoors as a way of processing.
Mm-hmm. That is really cool. And so like what does I guess there are no typical sessions because everyone's going to be different, of course, but what does like maybe one of your sessions that you feel like went really well look like? Like what was the process? How did it look? That kind of stuff.
Yeah, definitely. Ooh, it varies so much client to client. It's hard for me to say what specifically would have come up. I think that when I feel the best coming out of sessions, it's when I've shown up the most authentically.
Absolutely.
So that means that I am not afraid of self-disclosure when it makes sense. I'm not afraid to, challenge their eating disorder, but just generally just show up as a person. And there are definitely times where, for my own reasons, I'm more in my head, or I come in with one specific goal, or like, this is what we're going to do today. And I've stuck too rigidly to it and not kind of let the flow of the human interaction lead where we go. So I definitely think that that's a big component of it. And truthfully, just seeing a session that leads to maybe new insights, maybe new emotions. I had a session a few months ago where a client who has a really hard time with anger got really pissed off. And I was like, yeah, how is this? How is this to sit with anger, when you have not felt in your life like you deserve to do that? So I think that those types of things feel really good. But mostly I think it's just like when there's authenticity, hopefully on both sides, and vulnerability and a sense of safety. Those are kind of like the core components of, to me, what makes for a good session.
Absolutely. And then kind of to go back, so like, how do you approach a serious, like we kind of talked about the approach, but like, how does someone kind of get out of the hole of body dysmorphia in whatever kind of way they're experiencing it? And like, how long does treatment tend to last? What's the most common forms? Are medications ever involved or necessary, and that kind of?
Yeah. So eating disorders care has a lot of different levels. And so basically the appropriate level of care is determined. There are a set of guidelines for this, just based on a whole different, a whole list of how people are experiencing their eating disorder, how it's impacted them. So for some clients, they need to be hospitalized. So that means that they're having, really scary vitals. You know, they're way under like what their growth chart would say that their weight should look like.
Yeah.
They, you know, a whole lot of different things. Other things to look for with eating disorders are things like lanugo hair. People can get kind of like a fuzzy hair because they're really cold, like their systems can't keep them warm, temperature stuff. So most severe cases that they're hospitalized. The next kind of step down is residential, and we do have an adolescent residential facility here, right outside of Portland, and an adult facility down in Eugene, that are all kind of under our same like parent company.
Yeah.
So clients will go there, and they may stay there for 2 weeks, 4 weeks, or up to like 4 months. So residential stays can be a bit longer, and then the goal there is really like stabilization. So getting people, you know, 3 meals, 3 snacks a day, really probably limiting a lot of movement, although that is really client dependent too. For some people, reintegrating movement happens at different times. And then getting a lot of therapeutic support. And then they step down to us at PHP. And usually for most of our clients, they stay at PHP for like 6 to 8 weeks, I would say. But it also can really vary. And there's also movement that happens, you know, they may step down to PHP, and we realize after a couple weeks, they need to go back to residential. So that type of movement happens. And then if they're kind of making progress, then they may step down to IOP with us, intensive outpatient. And those stays also can be anywhere from like 4 to 8 weeks or more than that. And then we discharge clients to their outpatient teams. So that's like, you know, therapists in private practice, group practice in the community, dietitians, things like that. But I would say that the biggest thing with whether it be like someone struggling with body dysmorphia and maybe it's anorexia nervosa, bulimia nervosa, maybe it's ED, the biggest part is on the dietetic side, just getting the nutrients, especially for folks who are like really brain starved. It's really about like regular and consistent meals. And sometimes that has to be monitored too, because they've had so little that they're at risk for like refeeding. So that's a really big component. And I love the kind of multidisciplinary approach for eating disorders. So I work with recovery coaches who are like bachelor's level folks who are like recovered, and they hang out with clients throughout the day. They're rock stars. They do incredible work. And then we have dietitians, we have nurses in some facilities, and psychiatrists. So to your point about medication can definitely be a part of someone's treatment. Typically, it's really rare to see someone who's only diagnosed with an eating disorder. Oh, there's a lot of comorbidity of depression, anxiety, PTSD, and things outside of that as well. So that is also kind of medically managed with medication if that's the right fit for the client.
Absolutely. That definitely makes sense. And then I kind of like, as a follow-up question, and something I noticed with one of my friends who was anorexic and bulimic, she ended up going to an inpatient residential facility. And because, the body was so deprived of nutrients, she wasn't able to work out or like the movement that you were talking about. And then also once she did start eating normally, she ended up gaining like a decent amount of weight. And I don't know if this is true, but does like kind of that starvation kind of stunt your metabolism for a while? And then it, like, if that's the case, I imagine there's a lot of relapse kind of in that recovery process, because you're like, I'm back to where I didn't want to be.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, disordered eating impacts your metabolism for sure. And we kind of work on a set point theory. So that's just that like everyone has a growth chart, and they sort of stay typically around like a given growth percentage range that they're in. We see clients really fall off of that. So yes, so metabolism can be affected. The other thing too is that like weight cycling is really, really harmful to our bodies. And actually, so that happens through like regular dieting too. Most people think, okay, like I'm gonna do keto or Whole30 or whatever the hell the new thing is, you know, for a few months, I'm gonna get to like the body I want, you know, and for a lot of us, we never really get there. It's like a moving target. And so what happens then is, research indicates that 99% of diets don't work. And most people actually end up at the weight that they were, and typically higher months after kind of stopping their dieting. And so that type of weight cycling throughout someone's life can lead their set point to increase over time. And that can be in like chronic dieters throughout their lives, maybe not people who've ever been to eating disorder treatment, but that's true for a lot of folks. And I think you also asked about relapse.
Yeah.
And so relapse is really common with eating disorders, because I can't even count the number of clients that say like, well, if I just don't have to gain weight, I'm fine with this whole thing. I'll do the therapeutic work. I'll do, and it's like, we kind of have to realize like that's the work. Like sometimes that's a really big part of the work. And it can be really uncomfortable. I mean, these clients are eating a lot more than they were typically. They're hopefully like exercising for the purpose of weight loss or weight maintenance, less than they were. So it's uncomfortable.
Yeah, absolutely.
There is definitely a non-linear nature, which is the case for all mental health, treatment and therapeutic experience, but certainly that is the case with eating disorders treatment. It's not linear, a lot of up and down. And there's a lot of clients who will go to treatment a few times. That's not uncommon.
Yeah, it's definitely, I imagine, a really hard cycle to break, because the nature of it is changing your physiology to an extent that when you're getting back to normalcy, you're kind of like fast forwarding your body. Or I don't know if that made sense, but yeah. For sure. And then so now I'm going to kind of go towards advice questions, and one of the things is so we kind of talked about your involvement in undergrad. So I'll go to, as a former peer mentor, do you have any advice for students transferring? Or what were common things that came up?
Yeah, transfers from community colleges.
Yeah,
absolutely. That is, I did not go through that process. I think you did, right, Cass? Yeah. So it can be a tough process for sure. And one that, I was filling out like tax forms today for this job, and I'm like, this is not at all accessible. Like, I don't understand any of this. And I think that maybe sometimes how like academia can feel too.
Yeah.
But I would just say like that what we told all of our students that we saw, whether it was at community colleges coming to SDSU or even our students at SDSU, is come to the office, come to the peer advising office. I don't know how you're adjusting right now to virtual, sessions and things, but, seek the support, because the answers are there for you. But don't feel like you need to navigate it alone. And everyone is different. We had other peer advisors who like had kids and had full-time jobs, and like, so they needed to find, experiences. Maybe it was in peer advising, maybe it was elsewhere in campus involvement that fit for their lives. So I would just say, keep that in mind. Like I said, like I had the privilege of, working part-time, which gave me a lot of time to devote to all these different activities. And that's kind of how I used my time, but you got to just kind of find what fits for you. And that's something that the peer advisors can talk to you about too. It's not just like transcripts, grades, classes. It's also like, what are your future plans and how do we get you there? Because I do think San Diego State has a lot to offer, just even outside of like the psychology department in particular. I know that their women's studies club is very popular. And yeah, just seek the opportunities and seek the support.
Absolutely. And I think like on that note, for me as a transfer, what was really nice is I was lucky to have a student mentor who was enrolled in SDSU but had some issues, ended up going to Mesa, and then we transferred back to SDSU together. So she already had a lab. She was involved in several things, so she was able to get me into those things. But I do think like if you don't have that person, and that's totally fine, just exploring what opportunities and ways to be involved with the SDSU community is so important, because I think it really helped me, especially as a transfer, being able to navigate like what do I need to do here? What are the things that are going to make me look good? How do I make friends? Because I do think a friend and support system is so important. And luckily, the peer advising office, as well as my lab, I had access to graduate students. I had access to high achieving students, that we could also all talk about our classwork and all kind of be in it together and explore our different options. So for me, and my advice on that for anyone transferring is kind of to, or even like freshmen, what have you, is really look into what you can get involved in. Because ultimately you can make any experience relevant experience. So do something that you're going to enjoy and want to commit time to, and also think about how it's going to fit into your long-term goals. So that's kind of my little blurb there.
100%. Yep.
Yep. And then what was I going to say? Oh, what advice do you have for someone interested in becoming like a clinical therapist? Was there anything you wish you knew before, or anything that kind of caught you by surprise?
I think making sure that you're looking at accredited programs is probably something that they'll tell you in the peer advising office. And I'm glad that I had that insight, because I wouldn't have known that. And as I'm like going through my state registration right now, having our accreditation is KCREP, a KCREP accredited program, it kind of knocks out a few hurdles for you along the way. And typically those programs have really good access to the community and are, well thought of and things like that. So that's definitely something to consider. I'm kind of like the logistical end. I think also just considering like your trajectory into grad school. For me, I was kind of like, okay, I'm going to go, like, it was just sort of like, I'm going to go right into grad school. And I don't have regrets about that. But that's okay if it's also not your trajectory. I think that it can be easy to get caught up in like, it's the next thing, it's the next thing, it's the next thing. And you really do have to figure out like where you're at in your life. I know that even coming, like for me, like moving right from internship into work, there are a lot of people that say like, that is foolish as hell. Like you need to take a month off or something. I think I'm just kind of a person who's like, yeah, like let's keep this thing rolling. I feel like the momentum of it and let's just do it. Also could be a boundary issue, but it's probably a little both. So it's okay to take time off, like figure out what it is that you need. I think definitely figure out, I applied to 3 schools, Lewis and Clark, University of Colorado, Denver, and Portland State. And I interviewed at all of them. I got accepted to each of them. And I was kind of like, how do I make this call? Denver had a really good reputation. But I realized that a lot of their programming, to my understanding, was online. And I knew like my ADHD brain cannot do like a bunch of online classes in graduate school. That's not a good fit for me. So figuring out like how the program is laid out and whether or not it's going to fit for your life is really important. For me, it also came down to location. So I was sort of like, hey, well, I guess I'm moving to Denver or Portland. And coming up to Portland, I just fell in love with the city and I love the outdoors. I mean, our campus is sort of inherently healing. It's beautiful. I wish I could like share a screen of what our campus looks like, but I mean, just picking a place where you're going to be happy as a human, I think is definitely really important. And then counseling in particular, I think just like I said before, be ready for an emotional rigor and like a lot of self-reflection. That's such a big part of the work. If it's not in your program, I guess I would be confused by that and hope self-reflection's happening anyways. But be ready for that. Be ready to, I think also like my partner went through our program. So I had like the privilege of not needing to like explain what I was going through to someone, but if your partner is a chemical engineer and, did a PhD in that area, they're going to have a much different perspective on what grad school might be. And so I think in order to like keep your relationships well in your life, you kind of have to keep an open line of communication about what you're going through. And like Cassie mentioned too, like lean on your cohort. And they are the people who know exactly what it is that you're going through. And they're going to be awesome sources of support. Go to therapy, please. Get outside
Everyone
if that's
use
what you
therapy.
enjoy.
There's not
Yeah,
one person
everyone.
who
Everyone.
finding
Yep.
the right person is a whole nother step, but everyone can benefit from it. I'm not saying
Absolutely.
it's crazy, but I mean kind of.
Everybody has things to heal for sure.
Yeah.
So yeah, I think doing all of those things, just figuring out too, like ahead of time, what's going to be the right field for you. And that doesn't mean like once you get there that maybe it's not. But I think taking the time to figure out what is the difference between my life options and career options as an MSW versus an LPC versus a marriage and family therapist. Like if you have an idea of who you want to work with, some people are like really, really want to work with couples and families. Maybe marriage and family therapy is right for you. I know for me, I was kind of like, well, I definitely want to do eating disorders. I think couples work would be cool. Doing like sex therapy would be pretty cool. And I still am like really open to that work. But LPC was where I lent just because it was more general.
Yeah.
And it was the right choice for me, but definitely take the time and like figure out what's important to you.
Absolutely. And something I've like started to recommend that I think was recommended to me, but I was not taking advantage of. Definitely reach out to other graduate students in the programs you're looking at, because they will have the best understanding of what that program is, what it looks like. Like, yes, you can talk to the professors, but they're not in the program, right? So you want to really like, you can usually find current graduate students, at least someone somewhere where you can email them or see if you can get in contact with them. And they're just going to be such a good kind of reference point for
Definitely.
if you're actually interested in the program or not.
Yeah, that's a really good point. And that's one of the things about Lewis and Clark that I loved is they did a student panel at the interview where the professor stepped out and we just could ask whatever questions we wanted to current students. And since being in the program, I've done the panel, and now it's a Zoom panel. It's a little bit different. And extended my email. I mean, like there are people who are definitely going to be willing to communicate with you. And I think that you're spot on that they're going to have the best perspective of what the program actually feels like to be in. Like, can you work while you're in the program? Even like the questions about if you're moving, where are you going to live? Like what parts of the city do they like? Just that kind of stuff. Like it really is such a valuable resource to have.
I agree, absolutely. And maintaining, that personal life too. Like, what are you guys doing? Or do you not have one? Because maybe you don't want a graduate school where all the graduate students are saying like, my life at school, right? Like that's really important to kind of consider too. But yeah, that's awesome. So I think that's really kind of the main questions or question groups that I had to answer. Was there anything else you wanted to kind of share with students before we end recording?
I appreciate the time and just being able to talk this through. I would also say feel free to extend my email. I'm more than happy to talk to people about what the process looks like applying for grad school. I kind of still have like that peer advisor hat that I keep in my back pocket a little bit. So it doesn't go anywhere. Just like it's like right there. Just so yeah, I would love to do that. And I think, just using this platform and talking so much about eating disorders, I would really encourage you, for those of you who are interested, and even for those of you who aren't, is take a look at your feed in terms of like Instagram, Facebook, who you following, like do your best to seek out diverse bodies and diverse people. I think the more that we give space to people with, diverse set of identities and experiences, one thing, I think our empathy grows and our understanding and our like kind of wider lens of what the world looks like is expanded. That's good for us. That's good for everybody else. And go to therapy. Yep.
Try it out. That's also another thing too. Like if you are going to be a clinician, going to a clinician to see what a session looks like,
absolutely,
that's going to be really important, because what if you go and you're like, I don't want to sit in a room and talk with one person? Like that's going to be very telling. So I do recommend it. Obviously, don't pay a ridiculous amount for it if you can avoid that. But yeah, try it out.
Yeah, and you should have, I believe, services on campus too. And if not, if they're full, which I know sometimes happens on big campuses, they have referrals for you. There's a lot of people out there who do a sliding scale or who will do, really affordable work with you. So yeah, do that. Take care of yourselves. This is a strange time. So I guess also just leaving people with the message also that it's okay to just like not be okay right now. I'm sure this is hitting all of you differently. In California, you all have been really locked down. And that can mean isolation for people. That can mean, a kind of a trigger to a lot of what you've struggled with in the past. So reach out for support and also know that it's okay to not be okay.
Absolutely. I 100% agree. Thank you so much, McKenzie. I think students are really going to I just had a stroke. About the information we talked about.
Did I show them my dog?
Ooh, do it, yes.
Okay, I'll be right back. Come here, dude. Come on. Gotta show the students how cute you are. Ooh. This is my little bear.
The therapy dog.
This is Juniper, and she's also very good for mental health, aren't you?
Yes. Oh
Yeah.
my God, that face. Are you
Yeah.
kidding me? That's another thing you guys might want to look into, fostering. They pay for everything, and they're in need right now.
Absolutely.
Oh my gosh, I love it. Well, thank you again. Yeah, cool.
Thank you.